3 years ago, my son Thomas returned home from university with a woman named Charlotte. She was the very image of London elegance, all sleek handbags, sharp heels, and that clipped way of speaking that made you feel like every word had been measured before spoken. He told me they were getting married. I smiled and congratulated them, though something inside me shifted like the soil before a storm. Charlotte never quite looked me in the eye. The first time she visited our farm in Ashwell, she wrinkled her nose and kept her designer scarf tucked close to her face. "It's rather athy, isn't it?" she had said, standing by the fence where I kept the sows. "You can smell it on her," she later told Thomas. "She's a pig farmer." After that, the invitations stopped coming. I wasn't asked to attend their registry ceremony in Kensington. No one sent me a photo of the occasion. When I called, Charlotte answered with a clipped tone. "Margaret, you're lovely, but the city just isn't the place for someone from Ashwell. You always carry a bit of the countryside with you. I worry it's not good for a baby." That was the first time I learned she was pregnant. I spent the night tossing and turning, picturing my future grandchild. I imagined tiny socks and knitted blankets, the sort my own mother made. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen over the hills, I picked vegetables fresh from my garden, packed eggs, apples, and a jar of homemade chutney. I even changed into the cleanest clothes I owned. When I arrived at their London flat, I called from outside. Charlotte's voice was cold. "Please don't come up. The doctors advised strict rest. And, well, coming straight from the farm. I don't think it's ideal." My fingers gripped the basket tightly. "I'll just leave it by the door," I said. A pause. Then, "All right. But please don't linger." I placed the basket gently by the front door, then stood nearby under the shade of a newsagent's awning as a drizzle began to fall. I hoped, just for a glimpse of Thomas. Nearly an hour passed before he came out. He looked thinner than I remembered, more tired. "Mum," he said, avoiding my eyes. "It's cold. You should head home." I nodded, took the lukewarm cup of coffee he offered, and watched him disappear into the building again. No hug. No thank you. Just the sound of the rain on the pavement. Later that year, a neighbor told me they were throwing a birthday party for baby Alfie. I hadn't even known he had been born. Not a photo. Not a word. When I rang, Charlotte said, "It's best if you don't come. You wouldn't really fit in. Our friends, they're not used to countryside folk." I stared at the wall in front of me for a long while after that call. Then, I walked into the barn, wiped my hands on my apron, and said aloud to no one in particular, "Take all the pigs. Every last one." I wasn't sure what I was planning. But something in me had snapped. I sold everything. Every pig, every trough, every old tool that had sat rusting behind the barn. The money came in quietly, bank transfer by bank transfer, until it added up to something I had never seen before in my name. £25,000. I'd never owned anything so valuable in my life. Not the house, which my father had left me in pieces, and not the farm, which the bank once nearly took. But this money was mine, built from years of waking at dawn, mucking out pens, and delivering piglets in the cold. I knew exactly what I wanted to do with it. In the window of a jeweller's in Cambridge, I had once seen a necklace. A stunning, delicate piece with a sapphire pendant that looked like it had been plucked from the sky. I remembered stopping there during a supply trip, still in muddy boots, watching the necklace sparkle under perfect lighting. Charlotte had always said I was too plain for jewelry like that. So I bought it. Not the cheap imitation, not a second-hand version. The real thing. The shop assistant looked at me twice, possibly assuming I had come in to ask for directions or perhaps to clean the glass. But I took out the folded banknotes and laid them on the counter with quiet pride. It was boxed in a dark velvet case, and when I opened it at home, something shifted. Not just in the room, but in me. For the first time in years, I looked in the mirror and didn't see just the pig farmer. I saw Margaret. A woman who had worked, sacrificed, and survived. A week later, I received an invitation. From Thomas. Alfie's second birthday party. Charlotte's organized a little garden gathering. You should come. I stared at the white card, almost suspicious of its weight. Had he finally grown a spine? Or was this Charlotte's idea of charity? Either way, I would go. But not in mud-stained boots. Not with a crate of apples. And certainly not as the woman who'd once stood in the rain, waiting outside her own son's life. On the day of the party, I wore a cream blouse, my best wool skirt, and the sapphire necklace. It caught the sunlight like it belonged to a different world. I took the train to London, then the tube, then a short walk through polished streets lined with boxwood hedges and silent Teslas. When I reached their door, Charlotte opened it. She stared. Her gaze moved from my hair to my hands to the necklace, where it froze like she'd just seen a ghost. Margaret, she said, voice too bright. How unexpected. I stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. Thomas appeared with Alfie in his arms. The boy was beautiful, blonde curls and the same soft jaw his father had had as a baby. Hello, sweetheart, I said gently, stroking his cheek. I've waited so long to meet you. Charlotte hovered near the hors d'oeuvres, eyes still locked on my necklace. Is that real? She asked. I smiled. It is. She looked as if she had swallowed a lemon. The guests began to arrive, smart couples in navy blazers, women with perfect hair and small dogs, and they stared too. Not at me. At the necklace. Suddenly, I wasn't invisible. Charlotte's perfect party had a centerpiece, and it wasn't the cake. By mid-afternoon, the garden had filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and soft jazz from hidden speakers. Alfie toddled between picnic rugs, followed by Charlotte's hovering hand, always just behind him like a protective shadow. I stayed near the edge of the garden, beside the hydrangeas, sipping sparkling water and listening. People were talking about me. Not openly, of course. But I caught the glances. The quick nudges between elbows. The murmured guesses behind manicured hands. She said she's Thomas's mum. Really? I thought she passed away years ago. Did you see the necklace? That's not costume jewelry. They didn't know what to make of me. I didn't fit into their tidy boxes, the city types with their curated lives and cautious smiles. I was unexpected. And they hated unexpected. Charlotte tried to take control. She glided from guest to guest, her voice floating with rehearsed warmth, but her eyes kept flicking back to me, to the necklace, to the way people kept drifting in my direction. Thomas, bless him, made an effort. He sat with me on a low bench, pretending to catch his breath but really just trying to bridge a chasm he'd built with silence. I didn't think you'd actually come, he said softly. You invited me. I thought you might be busy with the animals. I smiled without showing teeth. The pigs are fine without me. Unlike some people. He flinched. Just a flicker, but it was there. Charlotte was nervous. She thought, he trailed off, unsure how to finish. She thought I'd embarrass you. I offered. He looked away. I'm not here to cause a scene, Thomas. I just wanted to see my grandson. And I wanted to wear something beautiful. That's all. He nodded, rubbing the back of his neck. She's just careful about appearances. I let the silence sit between us, heavy and slightly bitter. I'm not ashamed of where I come from, I said finally. Are you? He didn't answer. Later, I found myself speaking with a woman named Eleanor. She was older than Charlotte, perhaps late 50s, with silver hair tucked into a soft chignon and a quiet, intelligent gaze. I couldn't help admiring your necklace, she said gently. Thank you. It's new. It suits you. There's a story behind it, I imagine. There is. Years of mud and hard work. She smiled, a real one. I thought so. Women like us don't wear jewelry like that without reason. We talked for 20 minutes. About the countryside, old sheds, loss, and surviving it. For the first time in years, I felt like someone saw me. Not the farmer. Not the charity case. Just me. Eleanor left me with a parting remark that stayed long after the party ended. Appearances don't lie, Margaret. But they don't tell the whole truth either. As dusk approached, I stood beneath the fairy lights Charlotte had so carefully strung through the cherry trees. Alfie waddled up to me, holding out a crushed flower. For you, he said, blinking up at me with his father's eyes. I crouched down and took it, heart twisting gently. Thank you, my darling. And in that quiet moment, under the weight of a sapphire and a child's gift, I realized Charlotte had noticed. From across the garden, she watched me. But she wasn't smiling. A week passed after the garden party, and silence followed. No calls. No texts. No awkward apologies masked as polite invitations for tea. I wasn't surprised. Charlotte had a way of going quiet when she wanted something to disappear. She treated people like pages in a magazine. If a picture didn't fit the aesthetic, she simply turned the page. But then, one morning, Thomas rang. Mum. Are you at the farm today? Where else would I be? There's someone coming to view it. A potential buyer. Silence. You're selling the farm? He hesitated. You said you wanted to retire. I thought we'd start planning. My fingers curled around the phone. The gall of it. He hadn't set foot on that land in years, and now he thought he could sell it like a spare coat. I said I was thinking about slowing down, not handing everything over to strangers. It's just a viewing. Nothing's been decided. But I knew better. The decision had been made the moment Charlotte saw that necklace and realized it meant independence. And that terrified her. The next day, they came. A couple in a shiny black 4x4 with estate agent smiles and city shoes that clearly hadn't touched mud in years. This is it? The woman asked, eyeing the worn barn and gravel drive. Thomas stood beside me awkwardly, a clipboard in hand. Playing professional. Yes, I said flatly. This is it. Welcome to the shed, she laughed at. The woman giggled, confused. Sorry. Nothing, I replied. Let me show you around. We walked through the barn first. The air inside smelled of hay and old stories. Sunlight filtered through gaps in the timber, landing on worn tools and my father's workbench, still exactly as he'd left it. It's very rustic, the man said. I turned to him. My family has run this farm for 3 generations. Every scratch in that wood tells a story. Every corner of this place has been earned. Charlotte arrived late. She stepped out of her sleek car in heels far too clean and walked straight towards us with that usual, clipped smile. I hope you're finding everything to your satisfaction, she said, addressing the couple, not me. The woman nodded vaguely. It's charming. Though, the shed could be repurposed into a studio or even a wine cellar. Charlotte's eyes lit up. Exactly. I had the same thought. I walked to the center of the shed, slowly. This shed, I said, once held the only cow that survived a harsh winter. It kept my family fed. And when my husband died, I slept in here for weeks because the house felt too empty. The couple shifted uncomfortably. Charlotte's smile faltered. It's just a building, Mum. No. It's not. Silence stretched. Then I turned and walked out, leaving them behind. I didn't slam the door. I didn't shout. I just walked. Because sometimes, dignity is quieter than rage. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sound of the wind brushing against the farmhouse windows reminded me of all the winters I had weathered alone. I lay still, staring at the ceiling, trying not to let my heart feel too heavy. But the ache had settled in deep, and no tea or warm fire could lift it. In the early hours, I rose and wandered into my late husband's study. It had remained mostly untouched, just as he had left it. The scent of leather-bound books and pipe tobacco still lingered. I opened a drawer I hadn't touched in years. Inside was a folded letter, aged and slightly yellowed. It was addressed to me, in my husband's handwriting. I sat down. My hands trembled as I opened it. My dearest Margaret. If you're reading this, it means I'm no longer beside you. But you must know this, you've been the heart of this land far longer than I ever was. The strength you carry, the fire in you, it built this farm more than any bricks or fences. I know Thomas may not understand what this place means to you. I fear he never will. But one day, perhaps when I'm gone, you'll see clearly that this land still needs you. Or maybe it needs to rest, with you deciding how it ends. Whatever you choose, let it be yours. Not theirs. All my love. Edward. I sat for a long time, the words soaking in like warm sunlight after a long rain. He had seen this coming, somehow. Or perhaps he had simply known the tides of family too well. He had always been the quiet watcher, the calm before storms I never saw. Later that morning, I walked to the backfield. The grass was taller than usual, the wildflowers tangled and defiant. I sat on the old bench, the one Edward had built for my birthday 20 years ago. From there, I could see the entire estate, the barn, the crooked fence, the path down to the river. This was my kingdom. Imperfect. Weathered. But mine. The thought of it being turned into a weekend retreat, stripped of its memory, made my stomach turn. Thomas and Charlotte came again that afternoon. This time, they brought papers. Just standard documents to authorize the listing, Charlotte said, flicking through the pages as if they were receipts. I'm not signing anything, I said. Thomas sighed. Mum, be reasonable. I have been. For far too long. They exchanged glances. I found your father's letter, I said quietly. He left it for me. He knew this moment would come. And he made it very clear, this land is mine to choose, not yours to claim. Charlotte laughed dryly. You're being sentimental. No. I'm being sovereign. Her face hardened. You're letting emotion get in the way of progress. And you're mistaking arrogance for vision. Thomas reached for the papers, awkwardly tucking them back into his folder. There was a long pause. I stood. If you want tea, the kettle's on. If you want this land, you'll have to wait until I'm 6 feet under. And with that, I turned and left them standing in the doorway. I didn't cry. I didn't break. Because I finally remembered who I was. The next morning, I took out my best dress. It was tucked away in the cedar chest, still wrapped in tissue paper. Navy blue, with a pearl collar, one of the few things I had bought just for me, not the farm. I hadn't worn it in years, but it still fit, snug and proud. I pinned up my hair, dusted off my coat, and walked to the small safe behind the wardrobe. Inside was a velvet box I hadn't opened since Edward passed. I lifted the lid. There it was, the necklace. It was a gift from Edward on our 40th anniversary. White gold, delicate filigree, and a sapphire pendant that caught the light like a frozen tear. Worth £25,000 when he gave it to me. Back then, I had protested the price. It's not about the money, he had said. It's about what you're worth. I placed it gently around my neck. It felt heavier now, like it carried every memory we'd ever built. The farmers' market in town was lively that Saturday. Bunting fluttered between stools, and the scent of fresh bread and wet hay filled the air. I didn't go to sell, not this time. I went to be seen. And they did see me. Old neighbors I hadn't spoken to in months. Women who once pitied me for clinging to the land. They turned and stared when I passed, and not just at the necklace. It was the way I walked, shoulders square, chin lifted. I was no longer the farmer's widow. I was the land's keeper, by choice. Charlotte saw me. I spotted her by the artisan cheese stand, holding a designer handbag and wearing sunglasses despite the grey sky. She froze when she noticed the necklace. Her eyes narrowed. "That's new," she said, approaching with a tight smile. "No," I replied. "Just unseen." She laughed. "It's lovely. Bit extravagant, isn't it? I wore it to remind myself who I am." She glanced down at it again, her voice lowering. "You really plan to keep living out there?" "I really do." She looked around, perhaps hoping someone would save her from the conversation. "I suppose that's your choice," she said stiffly. "It always was." Later that afternoon, as the crowds thinned and the market began to pack up, I sat on a bench with a warm scone and a flask of tea. The necklace shimmered in the low sunlight, and for the first time in months, I felt no shame. No fear. No apology. This wasn't about jewelry. It wasn't about land. It was about dignity. About not being erased. And about knowing, at last, that the story wasn't finished, not while I still held the pen. It was a Thursday morning when the letter arrived. Plain envelope. Official seal. My name printed in stern black ink. I knew what it was before I opened it. I sat at the kitchen table, teacup in hand, and read the contents carefully. Thomas had engaged a solicitor. Apparently, he was trying to challenge the ownership of the land. He believed that as the only child, he had a right to it, or at least, a share. The letter was polite but pointed, requesting a formal meeting to clarify the future of the property. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. Charlotte never liked to get her hands dirty. But Thomas, he had always wanted control without the effort. And now, he had lawyers doing the heavy lifting. I called the number listed on the letter. The solicitor, Mr. Kingsley, answered in a clipped tone. I told him I'd be available the next morning. "I'm happy to meet at your office," I said. "Oh, there's no need for that, Mrs. Carter. Mr. Thomas prefers the comfort of your residence." Of course he did. At precisely 10, they arrived. Mr. Kingsley was a man of expensive shoes and a very deliberate smile. He offered his hand like it was a contract itself. Thomas, behind him, looked sheepish but determined. We sat in the parlor. I served tea. The solicitor began with compliments about the farm, the history, the emotional value. Then came the suggestion. It would be wise, perhaps even gracious, to consider transferring some of the land into a trust, allowing Mr. Carter to oversee development opportunities in the future. I stirred my tea. "So, in simpler words, you want me to give him control?" Mr. Kingsley blinked. "It would remain in your name, formally. But with shared authority." "Shared, meaning I have the title, but he has the power." Neither of them responded. I stood up and walked to the window. The view stretched wide, hay bales in the distance, the old oak tree leaning like an old friend. "I buried my husband on this land," I said, not turning around. "I delivered my child here. I rebuilt this house after the fire in '92. And now you come to me with paperwork that forgets all of that." Silence. I turned back. "Here's what I'll do." Thomas looked up, hopeful. "I will not sell this land. I will not split it. I will not sign your precious forms." His mouth opened, but I continued. "What I will do is take a drive to my own solicitor. One who knows my husband's will. One who knows the law better than you do. Mr. Kingsley cleared his throat. Of course, that is your right. I nodded. And if either of you ever send another letter like this again, it will be dealt with in court. Not over tea. They left shortly after, Mr. Kingsley making shallow remarks about understanding and process. But Thomas didn't say a word. As their car disappeared down the lane, I sat down in Edward's old chair. The room was quiet. But for the first time, it wasn't empty. It was full of decision. And I was done being asked for permission. The morning of the village charity auction was unusually warm for autumn. I wore my favorite tweed coat, the one Edward had always said made me look like I belonged on a portrait in a grand hall. I hadn't attended one of these events in years. But this time, I had a reason. As I arrived, the village hall buzzed with chatter. Tables lined with preserves, woodwork, painted pots, and hand-sewn crafts filled the room. At the far end stood the auction table, displaying donated items for bidding, all to raise money for the local hospice. I spotted Charlotte near the cake stall, laughing with a friend. She looked radiant as ever, dressed in a crisp blouse and tailored trousers. Her eyes scanned the room, pausing when they caught mine. A flicker of recognition, then a smirk. She approached slowly, a glass of elderflower cordial in one hand. Well, she said, eyeing my boots, I see you've made it off the farm. I smiled. And I see you've survived another week without lifting a finger. She chuckled, unbothered. You know, Thomas still thinks you'll change your mind. Does he? Everyone has a price, Edie. I didn't answer. Instead, I walked past her, directly to the auctioneer's table. There, under soft lighting and velvet cloth, rested the necklace. The one Edward had given me for our 20th anniversary. Antique platinum, diamonds set like frost on a cold morning. It had once belonged to his grandmother. The village hadn't seen it in years. Gasps rippled through the crowd as my name was announced with the donation. An anonymous donor, the auctioneer began, has offered a stunning vintage necklace, certified and appraised at over £25,000. Bidding starts at £2,000. Charlotte's eyes widened. I took a seat near the back. The bidding began, hesitant at first, then climbing steadily. Local collectors, a few antique dealers, even an online bidder on the screen joined in. When the final gavel fell, the necklace had sold for £27,600. A record for the village. Charlotte approached me again, slower this time. That necklace. Was that? Yes. But why? You always said you'd pass it down. I did. She blinked. I passed it to something worth more than family feuds. The hospice cared for Edward in his final days. That necklace doesn't belong in a vault. It belongs to people who show up when others walk away. Her lips parted, but no sound came. I walked out of the hall into the bright afternoon light. The air was crisp. The sun caught on the leaves turning gold. And I felt something I hadn't in years. Freedom. I had been a pig farmer. A mother. A widow. I had been overlooked, judged, mocked. But I had endured. And now, I was no longer just the woman who smelled of the farm. I was the one who owned the land beneath their feet, and the silence they could no longer fill.